And my co-minister, Reverend Misty Dawn Shelley, will be with you in just a couple of weeks. And I'm wondering if most of the folks here were part of the large and celebratory wedding that occurred yesterday on these grounds and in this meeting house, and I'm guessing everybody celebrated well. And you folks who are here in the sanctuary and you who are up at home are dutiful, faithful souls. So welcome. Our call to worship this morning come from the words of Meg Barnhouse. I forget that I can do this. We gather to worship, our hearts alive with hope that here we will be truly seen, that here we will be welcomed into the garden of this community where the simple and the elegant, the fluted and the frilled, the shy and the dramatic complement one another and are treasured. May we know that here each contributes in their way to the beauty of the whole. Come, let us worship together all genders, sexualities, politics, clappers and non-clappers, progressive and conservative. May we root ourselves in the values of this faith, compassion and courage, transcendence, justice, and transformation. Come, let us begin worship with our prelude. Words from Erica Hewitt. The word courage comes from the Latin cor, which means heart. According to poet Mark Nepo, the original use of the word courage meant to stand by one's core, a striking concept that reinforces the belief found in almost all traditions that living from the center, from the core, is what enables us to face whatever life has to offer. To encourage means to hearten, to impart strength and confidence. This is our work, to encourage one another, to be bold in engaging the world around us, as well as in what scares us internally. To give one another the confidence and heart to live as fully as possible. And now I invite the congregation and those on Zoom to read together the words on the screen as a final part of our chalice lighting with full hearts. Are there words on the screen? With full hearts, we affirm our relationships with one another. We recognize our agency and our connective power, and we accept our responsibility to be bold and courageous. United this house, symbol of all that we are, all that we have done together, and all that we will be. Encourage those within and beyond our walls. Repeat. Encourage those within and beyond our walls. Our opening hymn this morning is one with which I think you're familiar. And Chris, if you could go do the light right this moment, it would be in tune with the light. You put the lights on a few minutes ago. Yeah. So we can imagine that they're going on right now as we rise, as we are able, and sing together, "This Little Light of Mine," and these little lights of our congregation. Thank you. Number 118, for those who have a hymnal. And for those who don't, the words are, "This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine." And I will say out loud as you're finishing one verse, the words to the next one. They're very simple to follow along. 118, 118, 118. Yes. This morning, we have a story. It's a story with which you, certainly most of the older human beings here, have probably heard before several times. The story's called David and Goliath, and this is the telling of it by Christopher Boyce and adapted by me a bit. So once there was a young child, school-age child, who was worried about a very big problem, world hunger. They didn't bite anything small off, did they? World hunger. They read in the newspaper about children all over the world who did not have enough to eat. They wanted to do something about it, but there was only a little girl, and this was a giant problem. What could they possibly do that would make a difference? One day, when they were feeling very bad about the situation, they told their father what was on their mind. And after listening to their problem, he was very quiet. And he scratched his head and he rubbed his chin and he cleaned his glasses off. And finally he said, well, maybe it's time I told you a story. And he began to tell them the story of David and Goliath. David was a little boy who had a very big problem, he began. David lived in a land called Israel, and the Philistine soldiers were threatening to invade his country. Now, the very biggest Philistine soldier was named Goliath. And Goliath told the people of Israel, if you can find one person who can beat me in a fight, then I won't invade your country. At least he gave him a choice, right? But it didn't feel like much of a choice to them. There was no one in all of Israel who thought they could beat Goliath. Well, let's say there were probably no grown-ups who thought they could beat Goliath. He's much too tall and strong, the people said, and the problem is just too big for us. There is nothing we can do about this. David was surprised. David, this little boy, was surprised that nobody would fight Goliath. So he went to the king of Israel and he told him, I'll fight Goliath. The king looked down at the boy and he didn't want to send this young boy off to fight this big, huge man. But nobody else had volunteered. So he said to David, I admire your courage. I will give you the best armor in my kingdom. Now, in those days, armor was this heavy metal stuff, right? So when David put on the armor, little David, he fell straight down to the ground. After all, the armor was heavy and he was small. So David said, thanks, but no thanks. I think I'll just use my sling. The king was very, very surprised by the boy's courage. And he said, go forth and may God be with you. He didn't think he would see David again. David went out onto the battlefield and facing Goliath, he looks up at this big giant and he says, okay, I'm ready. Goliath saw this little boy standing before him and he began to laugh. You're just a boy. And then he began to roar. I mean, he was tickled pink by the idea that this little boy was going to defeat him. And while Goliath was laughing, David put a rock in his sling, twirled it around, and let the rock fly. The rock hit Goliath in the head, and the giant man came crashing to the ground. David was a hero. We might even say David's particular light was his ability with a slingshot. That's a great story, the child said, but what does it have to do with me? David lived a long time ago, said the father, but the world still has giant problems: hunger, pollution, wars, and we can do something about it. He got up from his chair and he walked over to the couch and he began tossing the cushions everywhere. "Dad, what are you doing?" the child asked. "I'm looking for spare change. You know how it always falls down in the cushions?" "Well, why do you want spare change?" "Well, I'm going to put all that spare change in a box and I'm going to give the money to an organization that works to feed people who are hungry and unable to get food right now." "What difference will that make?" said the child, looking at the few coins. "Well, see for yourself," the dad said, and he lifted up the cushions, and what she saw surprised her, amazed her even. Scattered underneath the cushions, along with the crumbs from the cookies and the little dust bunnies that live there, were dozens of coins. Some of them even shined through the dust bunnies and the cookie crumbs. "Wow," she said, "I never realized there was that much money in our couch." "It can add up," said her father. "The world has a giant problem, and too few of us think to throw stones that are close at hand. And if everyone used their coins to fight hunger, or their creativity to imagine other kinds of solutions, then we might just throw the stone that would send this giant problem crashing to the ground." The child smiled and got on their knees with their father and began to gather coins from underneath the cushion. As the choir comes forward to sing your anthem, I'll tell you so this child was filled with loving kindness, as was David in his courageous act. It was a loving kindness for his homeland and for his family and himself and the larger community in which he lived. As we listen, let us breathe deeply and fill ourselves with loving kindness. Our reading this morning comes out of the Islamic tradition, and it was written by a UU Muslim of Iraqi descent named Summer El-Bayati. The poem is based on an Arabic phrase, and I apologize in advance for my pronunciation. I listened carefully. Sabr wa iman is a familiar and commonly offered Muslim value and appears many times in the Quran, writes the author before the poem. Sabr wa iman, patience and faith. Beloveds, we must have patience and faith. More than that, we need resilience, perseverance, and persistence. Like the lioness in your home, lying in wait for the moth who flutters its wings, taunting, taunting. Or like the flower that awaits sun's rays, peeking, unveiling, unwrapping, slowly, slowly, against a vibrant golden plain. A regal lioness surveys her surroundings. Patience and faith require courage and strength, like the refugee who travels thousands of miles to begin a new life in a new place, traversing the unknown, crossing the borders of their mind. Patience and compassion. We now take an offering that allows us to exercise the all-important generosity of spirit, an offering that will support this self-supporting church and its ministries. The gifts of the congregation will be most gratefully received. And just a reminder that you may also put in the basket the survey you were asked to complete when you entered the meeting house this morning. Remember this. Let us enter into a short time of silence that we can each listen for the working of the Spirit of life, the divine mystery within. And let us do so with these words on our lips or in our hearts that we have already heard this morning. May I be filled with loving kindness. May I be well. May I be filled with loving kindness. May I be well. May I be peaceful and at ease. May I be whole. May you be filled with loving kindness. May you be well. May you be filled with loving kindness. May you be well. May you be peaceful and at ease. May you be whole. May we be filled with loving kindness. May we be well. May we be filled with loving kindness. May we all be well. May we be peaceful and at ease. May we be As a small child, I had a stuffed lion. He was about this big. He was a he. He was about this big, and he was sitting as cats sit, sort of kind of curled up, and his head came about that high. He came with the name Leo on his tag. And at 3, or however old I was when I could start saying Leo and I knew I had this stuffed animal, that seemed like a fine name. Leo was true to all the anthropomorphic projections placed upon him, not only as a lion, but as a stuffed lion. He was brave, he was fierce, he was courageous, and he protected me every night. In return, I prayed for his protection and well-being with all the fervor of a very frightened 3-year-old. Leo was my courage. And as Mark Nepo writes, he was my heart. As I began to age, from 3 maybe to 4, I was very worried about Leo, and I was very worried that he had to shoulder all this courage and bravery and protection for me every night. And I began to worry that maybe that wasn't fair. I don't know where I learned the concept fair, but somehow I worried about it, that it was unfair, and that therefore maybe I needed to learn to be just a little courageous myself, so that he didn't have to do all the protecting all night long. It takes a lifetime to grow, to develop our courage. Mine, I hope, is still growing. I hope yours is too. One of life's purposes, one source of life's meaning for all of us, are those little moments of courage that make up each and every life. And it's different for all of us. For some people, it just might be getting out of bed in the morning to face the world. It might be getting our aging bodies out of bed in the morning and beginning to work one joint at a time. For some of us, courage is going to bed alone in a dark room with only a stuffed lion for protection. There are many things that make up those little moments of courage. We have children. We face various illnesses and chronic conditions that shape our lives in ways we never expected. There's a contemporary American moral philosopher named Susan Nyman who's written several books. One is called Why Grow Up? Subversive Thoughts for an Infantile Age. Given all the forces arrayed against it, she writes, no wonder Immanuel Kant, the philosopher, thought growing up to be more a matter of courage than knowledge. Growing up to be more a matter of courage. I love that. It takes courage to get up, to face every day, whether we're facing going to school for the first time into a new class, whether we're facing a piece of a test or an exam on something we don't really understand. It takes courage. It takes courage to walk in the door of a new church. It takes courage to take off your mask, and it takes courage to put on your mask. David in Goliath, when I first heard that story, I thought, wow, that wasn't just courage to me, that was bravery, and I was very sure I didn't have that kind of bravery. Lao Tzu, the Chinese philosopher of the Tao Te Ching, wrote something, not an exact quote here, along the lines that physical courage is the willingness to face death, but moral courage is the willingness to live and face life. I love that distinction. The difference between bravery, which I'm pretty sure I don't have, and willingness to face death and undertake some very courageous physical act, and courage as a moral activity of being willing to look inward, as our chalice lighting invited us to do, to center ourselves, to know what is at our own core and our own heart, deep below all those things we were taught about life. Somewhere inside of there is what the poet Kabir called a jewel, and we each have one. How do we help to make it shine? How do we help it to be our light? It takes courage. So I want to say something about learning courage and David. David didn't just wander up to the king one day and say, hey, I've shot my slingshot off a couple of times. I know how to do this. This is easy. Which is what I thought when I heard this story as a kid. So I was really impressed and really scared because I knew I was never going to have that kind of courage. No way. But the story, it turns out, is a little more complicated than that. David was the youngest of a lot of children in his family, and his role in the family was to go out in the fields and to be the shepherd with the family's flock of sheep. Now, let's just remember David was 10 when he went in front of Goliath. I'm 70, I'm still not shooting a slingshot at a Goliath. So when he was sent into a field alone at night to guard a flock of sheep, which they could not go down to the grocery store and replace, or Home Depot if those sheep got killed by wolves or whatever the predator was in the place where David lived. But I imagine the wolves and the coyotes. And so as a small 5, 6-year-old child, that's where he spent his night. He didn't even have a stuffed lion in his bed in a room with a door. He was out there in the field, and he learned very young how to protect both himself and the sheep by practicing, which took courage, how to sling a rock with a slingshot. I'm sure his older siblings gave him early lessons. So he'd been practicing courage for a long, long time. He knew this was not an arrogant knowing. This was a knowing coming from having faced the fear and not allowing it to stop him, and having probably killed some coyotes and wolves, or again, whatever the predator was. He knew he was good with that slingshot. So when he came forward, it wasn't an act of foolish bravery, and it wasn't an act of unpracticed courage. Patience, which he brought to the practice of using a slingshot, had its reward. Patience and faith that if he just kept practicing, he would learn how to do this, and he would gain the courage little bit by little bit. That kind of learning of courage is a way of saying yes to life. It's a way of embracing what that little jewel inside of us is, rather than giving in to the fears which are not part of that jewel. Building courage, practicing courage is a little bit like trying to carve a statue or a work of art out of a piece of granite. It's chipping away one little piece at a time. There's no guarantee that it's going to come out looking the way you think it will, but you do it anyway. And when we do those little acts of courage for ourselves to fight against the fears that live within us and keep us from living from our core and our center, we act as inspiration for the person sitting next to us or behind us, or over there in the 5th row, or over there in the 10th row. And when we come together as a community and inspire ourselves to do small acts of community courage that are not necessarily what the whole world around us says we should be doing, but as a community, we feel is just and compassionate and transcendent and transformative, then we are inspiring a little more courage and a lot more life in the world. May it be so. Amen. Please rise as you are able and join in singing in however you are able with life and enthusiasm. Number 6 in the gray hymnal, Just as Long as I Have Breath. And we're going to ask Olga not to listen to the next thing I'm about to say, which is, this is not a concert, this is singing for your life. Go for it, guys. Whoa, thank you. The chalice is extinguished, but its light lives on in the minds and the hearts and the souls of each one of us. Let us carry the flame with us and share it with those whose lives touch ours, wrote Brian Keeley. And with these words from Wayne Arison, we end. Take courage, friends. The way is often hard, and the path is never clear. And the stakes, they are very high, they're giant. Take courage, for deep down there is one other truth. We are not alone. Go in peace, be well. May the Spirit of life be with you.